Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Freethinking podcast and YouTube show. My name is Scott Olson, here with Dr. Timothy Andrew Stratton. Got that right?
Right.
And we are going to be continuing our commentary on the episode 20 of the Free Will Show, which is a fantastic podcast that you guys should definitely check out. And yeah, we felt like there was a lot of good just jumping off points that we could have discussing free will. And so what we're going to talk about now is Matt had a response about what it means to be a compatibilist.
Yeah, it's probably also worth mentioning that just because one is a compatibilist doesn't mean that that person believes that determinism is true. So you can be a compatibilist and think that indeterminism is true, but you just think that free will is compatible with both. If you think that we have free will, you can think that free will is compatible with both determinism and indeterminism.
Amen to that. As I previously stated in the past episodes, one can affirm the thesis of compatibilism in a sense, while rejecting the idea that everything about humanity is exhaustively causally determined by something or someone else. One can affirm that a flavor of freedom is compatible with determinism, while rejecting the idea that desert responsibility is compatible with causal determinism. And like I said before, that is my current view, albeit I hold it loosely. I'd let it go if I needed to, but that's the way I currently see things. So you could say that I'm a super compatibilist, right? In one or two senses. And I do wear a cape some of the time. So yeah, you could call me a super compatibilist, but yeah, I know this confuses a few people, but I really encourage them to try harder to understand it, and many people do get it, right? A lot of people get it. I've been contacted by many, even other scholars, saying they are understanding what I'm arguing for here. So I guess saying that think about this. When I say that you need to try harder or be more careful to try to understand what I'm saying here, right? That right there even assumes libertarian freedom to try harder or not. This is related to what Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton calls the criterion of carefulness. And this is the case because if something or someone else causally determines a person to not grasp my case, then there's nothing that person can do to understand it. They cannot try harder or be more careful, right? That's not up to them if exhaustive divine determinism is true, if Ed is true. Anyway, I digress. I can affirm that some definitions of free will are compatible with determinism. And like I said in our previous episodes, I referenced the ordering from a menu illustration. We've discussed that in the past, but and other definitions, even libertarian understandings of freedom of thought, are compatible with the ability to actually pull it off and do otherwise. If they're the proper non-causally determined source, and they had the opportunity to think and or try otherwise, right? So, however, with all that said, I am an incompatibilist when it comes to desert responsibility being compatible with exhaustive determinism or exhaustive divine determinism. I'm also an incompatibilist when something or someone else actually causally determines a person to think, act, believe, behave, evaluate, or judge in a specific way. And I think what's been called the Stratonian thought experiment demonstrates this with force, or so it seems to me.
Is that named after popular NFL football player Tim Stratton?
That's right, that same guy. and it's not just the mad scientist, or yes. So it's the I didn't name it this. It was I just called it.
Yeah. So what thought experiment are you talking about?
Yeah, so it's the mad scientist thought experiment. It's in my book. It's in some of my blogs. I think we've talked about it before.
Okay.
And then others started calling it just on Facebook and stuff the Stratonian mad scientist thought experiment. Because this mad scientist, and I did discuss this here on our show at some point, but here the mad scientist causally determines all thoughts, all beliefs, all of your evaluations, and all of your judgments, right? Exactly how you think. It's not just he's causally determining what you think about, but he also causally determines how you evaluate certain propositions, how you judge certain statements, right? It's all of your thoughts, beliefs, all of your evaluations and judgments all the time. It's up to the mad scientist. It's not up to you. So if that's the case, say goodbye to being the source of these things. So, yeah, I guess that's what, does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. I was just,
Okay.
for our listeners who maybe
Yeah.
have not
Yeah.
been familiar with it.
The Stratonian mad scientist thought experiment. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tim, is there a book that they could read that in?
I have it right here. Whoa, there goes my camera. There you go. Here you go.
Wow.
Here it is.
How about that? You can read all about it in there. Shameless plug.
There you go.
Yeah. So Taylor Sear from the Free Will Show, he kind of makes a funny comment about the super compatibilists.
There's one article where John Fisher admits to being a super compatibilist, and he says, it's very funny, he says he doesn't wear a cape or anything, but he is a super compatibilist.
Right, yeah. Yeah, the advantage of a view like that is your view of free will doesn't depend on what science tells us about the nature of the world, like that we can have free will regardless of whether determinism is true, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, that's true. But think about this. My view that libertarian freedom is required for things like rational abduction and rational affirmation is based upon a metaphysical argument and is thus unscathed by anything a scientist might tell me for a couple reasons. Number one, because this is a metaphysical argument as opposed to an argument based upon scientific data. And number two, the scientist is assuming his or her ability to infer the best explanation of the data, which is something assumed by scientists, something assumed that they can do. So any claim from a scientist to the contrary would be self-defeating. So it doesn't, I mean, this is actually so strong that if a scientist tells you there is no libertarian freedom in the world, well, now you have an argument that says, well, look, you need to go back and check your data because you've reached a wrong decision, because this is a metaphysical argument, not based on science. So it's really, it doesn't matter what the scientist tells me here. We've got a logic-based case, and science, by the way, assumes logic before it even gets off the ground.
Right.
So, yeah.
You said that libertarian freedom is required for rational abduction and rational affirmation. But wouldn't it be more accurate to say that you believe that sourcehood is required for that?
So in this case, I show that sourcehood is necessary. The mad scientist thought experiment I offer demonstrates this. However, if one is causally determined to not possess actual access, right, metaphysically or epistemically or whatever, to alternative evaluative judgment options, what I call EJOs, right, then one cannot infer better and true beliefs over false beliefs, and thus one would stand in no epistemic position to know if he should have evaluated and judged otherwise. Thus, one cannot rationally affirm his conclusions or claims of knowledge because he doesn't know if he should have reached different conclusions or not. He can only hope and assume if he's going to affirm determinism. So, and that's, that's not rational affirmation. That's begging the question. So yeah, you do have to be the source at minimum. But then if something or someone else is causally determining you to not have actual access, even if it feels like you're thinking about these things, but if there's something that is keeping you, causally determining you from not having actual access to different EJOs, if you cannot judge otherwise, then you don't know if you should have judged otherwise. And that's a problem.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think I understand where you're coming from. So you're saying because of your mad scientist thought experiment, you show that sourcehood is necessary for rational responsibility, essentially. So if sourcehood is necessary, then that means compatibilism is false, assuming you can't be the source and determinism be true, which, like we talked about at the end of the last episode, almost nobody makes that case. So, okay, so that's what you mean when you say that libertarian freedom is required because you can't, because sourcehood is necessary. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
That
and
makes
then there's
sense.
other problems we can add too. If you're not the source, right? If I've talked a lot about a deity of deception, and this is, you can replace the mad scientist with the deity of deception. Let's bring up Loki again. He's coming up a lot lately. He's known as the god of mischief or a deity of deception. And so, if you affirm that a deity of deception causally determines all of your thoughts and beliefs all the time, even if he causally determines many of your beliefs to be correct, but you also affirm that he quite often causally determines you to happily affirm false beliefs, now you have an undercutting defeater to all of your beliefs. Your beliefs don't seem to be reliable. You can say, well, he probably does it most of the time, over 50% of the time. Still, really, you've got an undercutting defeater to all of your beliefs, even if 51% of your, even if he told you, look, I mean, why would you believe a deity of deception anyway? But even if he causally determined you to know the truth that 51% of your beliefs were true, or even 75% of your beliefs are true, but also know that he was going to causally determine you to have 25% or 49% to happily affirm false beliefs there, or whatever number you want to pick. Now you have an undercutting defeater to all of your beliefs because you don't know what ones are true or false. And in fact, when you start to evaluate these previously held beliefs and judgments and evaluations that were causally determined by something or someone else, and then you realize that something or someone else, in this case a deity of deception, is also causally determining your judgments and evaluations on your previous judgments and evaluations. Like I said, this is when Dr. Craig says a sense of vertigo sets in, because this is also like, I've said this in the past. It's like wondering if CNN is really the most trusted name in news, or are they fake news? And so you go to these fact checkers, and the fact checkers tell you, hey, we've done all the work. You can trust them. You can trust CNN. Go do it. But then you find out that they're employed by CNN. What? Can you trust them? No. A sense of vertigo sets in once again. So it's an undercutting defeater.
Or like if the Supreme Court says that a law is unconstitutional or constitutional, well, they're part of the government that is apparently making the unconstitutional law. And so can you really trust them to evaluate whether or not a law is constitutional?
Ooh, that sounds like an episode for another podcast. Right?
There's just a little drop in a little red pill there for you. But
well played.
Anyways, I digress. Let's go ahead and move on to the next bit on the Free Will Show.
We have some compatibilists believe that alternative possibilities are required, and some compatibilists don't. And the same is now true for libertarians. There are some libertarians who don't think that alternative possibilities are required.
Yeah, I guess we haven't really talked about that on the show before, maybe early on in season 1. But yeah, there are source or sourcehood incompatibilists. Some of them are libertarians. They think we have free will, even though, the freedom to do otherwise or alternative possibilities aren't necessarily required for free will.
Yeah.
So
and mostly because of Frankfurt Cases, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about Frankfurt Cases in season 1, and these are the kinds of cases that are supposed to show that alternative possibilities are not necessary for free will or moral responsibility.
Yeah. So as I've discussed in the past, I don't believe Frankfurt Cases should lead anybody to think that exhaustive determinism is true. Indeed, it seems to me that these Frankfurt Cases presuppose libertarian freedom to think or think otherwise. And this is because if the thinker would have thought otherwise, it seems like it's possible in these scenarios, then the counterfactual intervener would have stepped in and causally determined the thinker not to act otherwise. So the thinker is free to think in a libertarian sense, but cannot physically do otherwise or act otherwise. There's still a flicker of freedom, as it were, in a libertarian sense. But even if there is a real legitimate flicker of freedom, then Ed is false. Exhaustive divine determinism is false. If there is anything that is really free in a libertarian sense, in an aspect of a human's existence, then say goodbye to the E of Ed, right? And we discussed this in the past. So
yeah, but okay, but that's not what Frankfurt cases are. Frankfurt cases aren't supposed to show exhaustive determinism, are they? Aren't they just supposed to demonstrate that alternative possibilities aren't required for responsibility?
yeah, well, that's right. But I can't tell you how many times I've had these debates and conversations with different Calvinists or determinists in general, where they offer a Frankfurt case and what they're trying to show me that libertarian freedom is impossible, and because look, that you don't have an ability to do otherwise in these situations, and I point out to them, you're assuming and implying libertarian freedom to think otherwise, and that's what I care about. That's why I offer the free thinking argument. I don't offer the free doing or free acting or argument. I am laser focused on the ability to think or think otherwise, and to not be a passive cog when it comes to my judgments and evaluations. That it's up to me, not up to something or someone else.
Right. I just want to real quick, for those who aren't, steeped in this debate, Frankfurt case is essentially a case that, again, tries to show that there are instances where an agent appears to be morally responsible, even though they didn't have the ability to do otherwise. So, for example, the common one is that suppose a third party, like a mad scientist that really wants Tim dead, wires my brain up unknowingly, that will cause me to shoot Tim in a certain circumstance. But it turns out I also seem to want Tim dead. And so I end up pulling the trigger on a gun of my own, seemingly of my own volition. But if I were to have not pulled the trigger, that mad scientist would have triggered something in my brain to cause me to shoot Tim instead. And so an instance where I had no alternative other than to shoot Tim, but since it seemed to have been my own decision to shoot Tim, I am still morally responsible, even though there aren't alternative possibilities. So there are more sophisticated cases than that, but that's kind of the general idea for those who aren't aware of what a Frankfurt case is.
Yeah, a lot of these cases involve politicians and a voter in a voting booth and a mad scientist and things like that too. And so
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, the Frankfurt case or the Frankfurt style cases, and I'm showing that even if this is the case, the possibility of alternative thinking seems to be assumed by the Frankfurt proponent. So Frankfurt cases cannot be used to support exhaustive determinism or exhaustive divine determinism. And again, that's why I include the E in ed, and that's my target. And I don't care if a lot of things are causally determined. I care that some things aren't. And so, yeah, I don't think Frankfurt cases, I've never seen one. There's so many of them out there, and I've looked at a lot of them, but I've never seen one that really seems to get one's attention, that seems to assume exhaustive divine determinism or exhaustive determinism of any kind. So with that said,
in like kind of the whole thing is, so when let's say I chose to not, or I tried to not shoot you and I was causally determined to, what was going through my mind? Oh, I'm going to shoot you. Or was it, no, I don't want to do this, and then I did it? Because if it's no, I don't want to do this, that seems to indicate I have the ability to at least think, no, don't do this, rather than, yes, I do want to do this. So there's an alternative possibility of thinking in that particular instance, even though there's no alternative possibility of action.
Yeah. You were in a scenario where you could take your thoughts captive or be taken captive by your thoughts. So we look at 2 Corinthians 10:5, where Paul says that we need to take our thoughts captive to obey Christ, to obey, according to Paul in what's the reference? Colossians 1:16. Is that right? I think so. Where he basically says that Jesus is ultimate reality. So he's saying, take your thoughts captive to obey reality. And but he also says in Colossians 2:8 that we can be taken captive by bad thinking. So right there in that scenario that you mentioned, if you let's just say the mad scientist is going to make sure you pull that trigger But he sees that you're going to do it on your own, so he doesn't have to touch you. It's hands off. And if you're about to do it, then he doesn't touch it. And then if you shoot me, you're responsible. But in that same situation, you're about to shoot me, and then you're like, I'm taking this thought captive to obey Christ. I should not do this. I want to do it. I want to shoot Tim, but I ought not do it. So you holster your weapon and walk away. But then the counterfactual intervener, that mad scientist, he pushes the button and he gets control of your brain. And then you draw for your weapon and you turn around and you start shooting at me. So now who's responsible? Is it you? No, you took your thoughts captive. You chose to do otherwise. You used your libertarian free thinking to say, no, I'm not going to do this. Then he overrided your free thinking and also your responsibility. And now you shouldn't be blamed. Right. You shouldn't be held blameworthy. The mad scientist should. So anyway, I hope that paints a clearer picture for our viewers.
Yep.
So let me get back to sourcehood, libertarian freedom. Many people are confused because I state that all that is required for mere Molinism or even for libertarian freedom is sourcehood freedom, right? Not being ultimately causally determined by something or someone else. That's all I need to make my case. And I believe my mad scientist thought experiment shows why I must be the proper source of my evaluations, judgings, and weighings. Be that as it may, I also argue for the following. So let me state it this way. The opportunity to exercise an ability to choose among a range of options, not just one, a range of options, each of which is compatible with one's nature in a circumstance where the antecedent conditions are insufficient to causally determine the agent's choice. So I argue for this sourcehood condition, not being causally determined by something else, but then I also show how, at least many times, this is vital to have this opportunity to exercise an ability to choose among several options, each of which is compatible with my nature at that moment in a circumstance where the antecedent conditions, the past conditions, are insufficient to causally determine my choice. But let's suppose I can't demonstrate that latter part of it. As long as I can demonstrate sourcehood libertarian freedom, not being causally determined by something or someone else, then my case for mere Molinism and against exhaustive divine determinism passes.
Amen, brother. Yeah, so they go on and say,
according to source libertarians, in order for us to be the appropriate sources of our behavior, to be morally responsible, there has to be indeterminacy in the world at some point.
Yeah.
It can't be that our actions are causally determined by factors beyond our control.
Yeah, this reminds me of indirect doxastic voluntarism. And I discuss this in my book when dealing with rational responsibility. But let's just go with moral responsibility and keep that in mind right now. This would also have to be the case so think about it this way. The drunk driver might not, let's just say he had no ability to do otherwise than crash his car at the moment of the crash, right? At that moment, he might not have had an ability to do otherwise, but he did have the opportunity to not take the first drink of alcohol in the first place, but failed to do so. So if that's the case, then he still deserves blame and he's guilty. However, let's get back to rational responsibility. And with rationality and rational inference and affirmation in mind, I argue that one must be the source when contemplating alternative ejos, because if something or someone else causally determines an agent to happily affirm a false belief, then it's impossible, at least in this circumstance, for the agent to infer a better or true belief. And if it's impossible to rationally infer a better or true belief because the non-rational laws and events of nature or a deity of deception are, they're all unreliable causal forces if these things causally determine the way we think and believe, right? But if this is the case, then one stands in no position to know if he really has affirmed a true belief. Thus, if one can only hope and assume that something or someone else that's not reliable has causally determined him to affirm true beliefs, then one cannot rationally affirm that one has, in fact, actually inferred the best belief. And as William Lane Craig says, a sense of vertigo sets in. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Scott?
Well, and again, I mean, I think this is where the exhaustive adjective is, or I suppose maybe it's an adverb. I don't know. Why that's an important thing to note, because something has to break out of that causal chain in order for, you know, the vertigo to not reach its logical conclusion, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right, Tim, let's wrap that one up there, and there will be another one coming out the next week as we continue our discussion on the Free Will Show. So see you guys later.